The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. And spring practice is underway. And in to share what he saw last week in the first week of spring practice is Swamp 24/7's Thomas Goldkamp. And if you want the most in-depth spring preview coverage and updates, you have got to head over to Swamp 24/7, where Thomas and the rest of the staff are getting it done. Thomas, thanks for joining Gators Breakdown.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Always great to be on.
Before we get started, guys, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes as well as articles from the News for Jax sports team. Also, catch us on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, Spotify. I'm using those services. Please share, rate, and review the show. And on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. So, Thomas, I probably should have hit on this a bit more in previewing the spring, but going from year one to year two, pretty substantial jump in just expectations and how smooth the operation can be. In year one, everyone's trying to figure everything out. Players are learning the playbook, getting used to new coaches. Everything's so new. Coaches trying to figure out what players do well while installing, some schemes and playbooks. So, learning just who their players are and what they can do. There's not a lot of time to work on the finer details in spring practice, the first spring. So now that you may get to see them working on in year two, so player and coaches know what it takes. They know the expectations of each other, and players have an understanding of scheme and playbook now. And it can either go deeper into the playbook or continue to do the things they already do so well and just kind of build off of that. So, Thomas, besides the newcomer early enrollees, this spring is already so much different, and it's being shown. There's more attention to detail. Practice is now more of a smooth operation, allowing for more growth this spring.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think last year when Florida's coaches first took over, it was what you would expect. There was a lot of stopping practice, after a certain drill, making sure that guys are running it the way that they want to, and you really haven't seen any of that this spring. I mean, this is a team that kind of knows the ropes now, and I think you kind of hinted at it. Right now, you've got veterans that are kind of walking the younger guys through it. So you almost have coaches on the field now. And it's been pretty noticeable to me. I pointed out in one of our practice reviews, something really, really simple and probably stupid even. But Greg Knox, when they were doing their running back drills, they have a drill where they go through some cuts and then they duck under a gate, to simulate kind of getting good leverage. And, last spring it was funny because you could hear him across the practice field. Players would ding the top of their helmet on the gate, and he would just go off. And I was standing next to that drill the other day, and I didn't hear a single ding from a helmet. He was much more, quiet and just kind of coaching guys up. And I think that's what you want to see. You want to see that development where players are understanding how the coaches want it done, and they're going out and they're doing it.
And, of course, leading into spring practice, Mullen made some headlines when, in response to a question about the quarterback position being wrapped up, that basically was pointing out that there is competition at every position, including quarterback. But, since practice has started, Felipe Franks looks to be continuing an upward trend coming off of last season.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think he's looked really good. I mean, obviously, we've only, seen 3 practices so far, but he just there's a whole vibe around the program that he's the guy, and it's very evident when you walk out there that he's the number one guy. Everybody respects that. Everybody's there for that, and I think you can kind of see it in his play. He's more confident out there, and I think it's spread really to a lot of the guys. The receivers have been super sharp from what we've seen this spring, and I think a lot of that is just understanding that they know that they have a guy that they've worked with before. They know what to expect. He's worked with them throughout the offseason. And it makes a world of difference. I mean, the offense, you usually expect them to be a little bit behind the defense, but for the most part, without a live pass rush so far, they've had their way with the secondary and really have looked crisp in the passing game, mostly because Franks is, I just think, a better quarterback right now.
Yeah, Thomas, you bring up a good point. I probably should have did it before we started here, but yeah, it's just been a lot of pajama practice so far, except for the 11 on or full pad practice we got over the weekend. But not much going on in much of physicality, but we'll get some more of that in the coming weeks, and of course starting this week. Also looks like Emory Jones pretty solidified as the backup now, and I don't know if. I think most people kind of assume that, of course, battling Kyle Trask for that number 2 spot with Trask having last year as well in the system. But it kind of seems like Emory Jones are just kind of biding the time until, Felipe Franks after this season. And you can kind of tell Emory's the guy behind Franks right now. That backup role pretty much solidified.
Yeah, I think so. I think, that's been one of the things that stood out to me the most this spring is just how comfortable he looks. Because, we were sitting here last year and, people hate to hear that, that guy's not ready, but he was not ready at all last year. He didn't look very good. It was a case where I didn't even necessarily think that based on what we had seen that he might ever be the guy. And he looks totally different now. I mean, the job Dan Mullen and the staff have done developing him is really, really impressive because he looks like a completely different player.
All right, Thomas. And now I'm not sure how clear the pecking order is right now behind LaMichael Pirine, but I want to go to a player that has some injury problems in the last couple of years. But Malik Davis, he doesn't seem to be missing a step early on.
No, he really, that was another thing that jumped out right away. When we're watching these guys, Marco Wilson and Malik Davis coming off season-ending injuries, Davis looks great. He's not wearing any protective kind of boot or neoprene, ankle wrap that we can see on the broken foot. He looks really good. He looks sharp. He's as far as I can tell, he's full contact. So we'll see what he does once they get into the scrimmage and have a little bit more physical practice. But he looks great so far.
Thomas, would you say just kind of guessing right here as the season goes on? As last season went on, we just saw the kind of three-headed workhorse with Scarlett Pirine. You saw Davis already on the season, and also Pierce. But it looks to be Pirine, Davis, Pierce now. Do you see maybe it kind of maybe playing out coming up in the 2019 season the way it did as the season goes on? They maybe kind of concentrate on just two guys, or with Pirine, Davis, and Pierce, and the experience all three of those guys now bring back. Do you kind of maybe seeing a three-way, three-headed monster all the way through the season?
Yeah, I think all three of those guys are going to get a lot of run. I think it'll be more LaMichael Pirine and then the other two, as opposed to last year. You look at the carries were split. I think there was only like 3 carries difference between Scarlett and Pirine. I think you'll see LaMichael Pirine really be more the bell cow back, so to speak. But I think you're going to see Pierce and Davis really kind of split reps behind him pretty evenly.
All right, Thomas, the entire wide receiver core returns. And so what do you see as the focus of that group right now is in the early parts of spring practice? They know the offense. They've had a year in the offense. Everybody comes back. You're not really having to work. Jacob Copeland will get some more playing time, of course, and they'll try and fit him into the rotation. But what seems to be the focus of that group early on?
Well, I think, when you've got that many guys returning, it's really a competition. Dan Mullen talks about wanting to have competition at every spot. They have it at receiver. I mean, there are guys that are not going to get as many snaps as they want next year just because they have so many guys in that room that are talented. I think Trayvon Grimes really took steps at the end of last season. You're seeing him kind of make a jump in the spring and continue that. Van Jefferson's obviously a very talented player. I think for that group, what you really want to see is you want to see those explosive guys, like Tyree Cleveland and Kadarius Toney have more of an impact overall because Florida's offense is as efficient as it was last year. They didn't really connect on a ton of explosive plays. And some of that was Felipe Frank's, first year in a new system. But a lot of it was the fact that the coaches didn't really feel like they could leave Kadarius Toney in there as an every snap kind of player. They never really quite knew what they were getting out of him. Tyree Cleveland, for whatever reason, it just didn't quite click for him last year. The numbers were down a good bit. I think for Florida, if you're the coaching staff looking at it this spring, those are the two guys you really hone in on and try to get them to develop a little bit more because you know what you're getting out of Swain, you know what you're getting out of Hammond. To this point, you have a pretty good feel for Jefferson and Grimes. If you can get those other two going, then you have the chance to really, really open some things up on offense.
And Thomas, just as it seemed, he was getting inserted into the offense more early on in spring practice. It seems Lucas Kroll, tight end, seems to be out for a little bit with a shoulder injury after impressing those first couple of practices. This group has a lot of change going on.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Tight end is one of those spots like offensive line where you lose a lot of veteran guys, and I think Florida definitely has the talent there. But how it's going to mesh is going to be interesting because they basically have 2 tight end reads, so to speak. They have the more traditional, what people think of tight end, the inline blocker. But Dan Mullen loves to have a second guy that they can play as a flex. A guy that can line up as an inline guy, but more typically is going to be in the slot as a receiver, kind of trying to pull a linebacker into coverage. That's the guy I think Kyle Pitts. I think he fits that role really, really well and could really be a weapon. But Kamori Gamble's had a good spring so far, and like you said, Kroll was looking pretty impressive in those first 2 practices before he came down with that injury.
And as I mentioned earlier, it's hard to gauge the offensive line early on since most of the practice has been without pads. But there seems to be 5, 6 guys leading the way, and maybe a lot to figure out for depth behind those starting 5 or 6.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And we kind of expected that going into spring. We said that there were 6, maybe 7 guys if Noah Banks was healthy, that you would basically say were the guys competing for the 5 starting roles. And then after that, that's where you really, really are going to need some development because, you've got true freshmen basically behind that. I think the starters, again, they're not in pads yet, really, so it's hard to say. The starters have done probably a little bit better than I expected in that starting 5 group. The backups look like you would expect. I mean, that's a true freshman unit going against seasoned veterans on the pass rush. And, suffice it to say, there is a lot of work that needs to be done still.
Thomas, if you had to kind of, I guess, maybe break the offensive line up a little bit, are they better inside than they are outside at the tackle spots?
I think they have the potential to be. The interior has struggled a little bit with the pass rush. That's pretty typical. Those guys are used to being, the road graders in high school in the run game. And, so I think that they've got to get better there. The tackles, I actually think the tackles have done okay. The guy that's kind of impressed me for not standing out in a bad way is John Delance, the transfer from Texas. He's done a really nice job on the right side so far. Stone Forsythe still gets beat a little bit here and there, but he's been fairly consistent. I don't know that there's a strength of the unit, so to speak, right now. Is the interior stronger? I'm not sure. I think they have the potential to be, but right now it's a very green unit, very much.
Yeah. Thomas Goldkamp from Swamp 24/7 joining us here on Gators Breakdown. Let's move to the defense where the Gators are replacing a lot of production off last year's team. What does it look like early on in replacing Polite, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and Vashawn Joseph?
I think that there's a lot of talent. Jonathan Greenard's a guy that, people have asked for the comparison. How does he stack up to Ja'Kai Polite? He's not the athlete I think that Polite was on tape. But the thing that stands out to me about him is he's very fluid. He just kind of always sneaks around the ball, which is really what you want out of that edge defender. A guy that can kind of feel where the protection is and slip past it. He had a really nice pick in zone coverage on Felipe Franks the other day. And so I think he's clearly the starter at that position. And then I think there's probably 4 other guys that are basically all repping as the number 2 behind him. From the younger David Reese to Mahmoud Diabate, to Antonius Clayton is also in that mix. Andrew Chatfield. So there's a lot of options there. I think that's going to be one of those positions, particularly looking for Polite's replacement, where it's going to take some games, and then just kind of whoever's the hot hand, so to speak, that's going to be the guy that fills in behind Greenard and kind of get that 1-2 punch.
Thomas, is there any early indication of Dean filling in that nickel spot, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson leaving it open? And I don't have much doubt that he can stick with receivers and stay with receivers, but is there any inclination he could be the playmaker type?
Yeah, there's no doubt. I've been as high on him from day one as probably anybody. Chauncey was so good last year. I think, because of the way his sophomore season went, people maybe didn't expect as much out of him as he produced. He was really, really good last year. And so there's obviously some concern, that you have drop off there, but I think the nickel position probably suits Trey Dean's skill set a little bit better. We saw him, especially in the bowl game. I remember getting picked on a little bit in coverage down the field. You don't have to do that quite as much when you're at nickel. And then the other thing is he's a really good blitzer. He's very physical and kind of has that knack. And that's where we've really seen him show up. And I think that's something that he can kind of fill in, where Gardner-Johnson left off. He's really impressive to me so far.
Another player that's been kind of impressive, it seems, and if you're out there at practice, you can definitely see it in the speed of Amari Burney at linebacker. Yeah,
there's no doubt. He's a guy that could play safety. He could play he could probably play corner. I really think he has some of the. I'm not kidding. He has some of the best recovery speed on the team. Right up there with C.J. Henderson. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when the pads come on for him. Because we were watching some of the blocking drills, circle of life type stuff that they did to start Wednesday's practice, and he, I don't want to say he struggled, but he looked more like a defensive back than a linebacker, and so that's the area that you're going to have to watch with him once they start to get physical. But he's really, really impressive getting to the flats in coverage. He can run sideline to sideline with the best of them. So if they can get him to the point where physically, he can hold up against some of these big, the bigger bruising backs in the SEC, Florida's got a chance to be really, really special there.
Thomas, when we're at the open practice that's coming up Saturday, two players I'll really be keyed on and looking at, it will be, just because of more physicality coming up in these practices, Elijah Conliffe and TJ Slayton. We saw good things this time a year ago. We were talking about these two, but I really think they can be the key guys in this defensive line if they're going to take off and take that next step.
Yeah, I mean, having said that, I agree because I think Florida needs the depth at defensive tackle. But Adam Schuler's been really, really good. I mean, he's been such a pleasant surprise since he transferred to Florida. And Kyrie Campbell's having a pretty good spring too. The one thing I'll say, and I said it before spring, is I think you need to be a little bit careful. We were very high on Slayton and Conliffe, as were Florida's coaches last year. 2 games in, and they were replaced in the starting lineup, and you didn't hear from them for a while. So spring, especially, when you've got 4 starters being replaced on the offensive line, it's really hard to get a gauge on those guys. And so, yeah, even though they'll be in pads Saturday, you hope that they look really good because they should. They should against an offensive line that's, really, really kind of getting its feet wet for the first time. But, I don't know how much you take away from that coming out of the spring necessarily. Yeah. Those are guys that are going to have to show it on the field. But there's no doubt, like you said, I mean, Florida needs those guys. Those are 2 of the, kind of the star guys that they recruited a couple classes ago. And it's their junior year. It's time for them to start showing up.
Speaking of guys that would be, we didn't get to see a whole lot of last year. We kind of expect to hear their name more this year, especially in spring. Looks like Malik Langham is another player that might be sliding in that inside on defensive line.
Yeah, no doubt. He's kind of played both 3-tech and nose from what I've seen. He's really, really big. I was talking to Nick Delatorre, one of the other Florida beat writers, about it, and he doesn't really stick out upper body wise. His arms aren't necessarily the biggest, but he just has tree trunks for legs, and so he's a guy that as he gets comfortable, he's going to have the ability to really stand in there and kind of hold against the run, and I think be a big difference maker. But he's very raw right now. There's a reason that Andrew Chatfield got in games late last year and Langham really didn't. He's got a ways to go still. But definitely a guy that I think you look, if not this year, then next year for sure is a guy that'll be a big contributor.
Yeah, 6'4", 286. We'll see how much more we see him there inside. So of course, we can't go without saying we see Marco Wilson on the field, looking healthy, going through drills, but right now, no contact protocol. But it's true freshman Chris Steele in there getting the reps with the ones on defense. And from the very first practice, it's still lining up opposite CJ Henderson as a number 2 cornerback. And Mullen even said, I don't temper the expectations. There's a couple corners out. He's got his opportunity. He's learning out there, Thomas.
Yeah, there's no doubt. He, I don't want to say he's had a rough go of it, but I mean, look, you're going against Van Jefferson, a guy that's, a 5th-year senior. The guy's been around the block. He's been around really good receivers. You're going against Trayvon Grimes, who physically is a matchup nightmare for any cornerback. Yeah, he's getting beat. But you know what? He's been in really good position throughout. He just hasn't quite flipped that switch where he's turned really good positioning into, pass breakups and interceptions. But that's going to come. I mean, that's the beauty of the spring for him and really for Florida is, you get thrown into that fire right away. Guess what? You get a lot better, a lot quicker. And you saw it last year with Trey Dean already. He looks like, one of the team's best players on defense. Well, he had some rough patches last year, and that's a little bit what Chris Steele's going through right now. But I think it's definitely going to pay dividends. And look, Florida's getting back to the point where that secondary is a legit 3 deep with guys that, maybe could start anywhere in the SEC.
And lastly here, is there any clarity on the safety position so far? We know it's early, but any chance we see a player? I know you've been high on John Huggins. I know corner, safety. Any chance he gets a crack there at safety?
I don't think so. I think Florida's got enough other bodies. I think the coaching staff really likes Juwan Taylor, and I know fans maybe aren't quite as high on him. I thought he played really well towards the end of last season, and he's really picked up there, and he's one of the leaders back there. So I think that he's definitely going to be one of your guys. Everybody would love to see Brad Stewart take the next step. For whatever reason, Donovan Steiner's been repping ahead of him. And I think it has to do with something off the field because, Brad Stewart's a guy that physically and from an instinct standpoint is off the charts. I mean, he's really good. And we've seen it, they look back at that LSU game, obviously made some game changing plays. But whatever it is, whether it's meetings or, that kind of thing, just, being a little bit more attentive to what the coaches are saying. He's a guy that I think you need to take the next step. Sean Davis hadn't practiced in the first 3 practices, but once he's back, he's another guy that has a lot of athletic ability. But I think Florida will be fine there. They've got a lot of experience. You just hope that, a guy like Stewart can step up, and so that you have kind of that ball hawking playmaker back there that Florida fans are used to.
All right, Thomas Goldkamp of Swamp 24/7 joining us here on Gators Breakdown. Thomas, I know spring practice in full swing now, but what you guys got coming up on the site?
Oh, we got plenty. I mean, obviously Florida's going to have a couple other practices that are open to the media, and obviously we'll be out there and providing plenty of live updates as well as after the fact practice notes, VIP type stuff. So I'm always on the board. It. Here to answer any questions anybody may have. So definitely encourage you guys to check us out at 24/7 Sports. And Dave, obviously, it's always great talking with you. So anytime you want to have me on, I'm happy to join.
All right, Thomas, thanks so much. Absolutely. Hope to see you on there Saturday at the open practice. We'll get to mingle with some fans and get to see one more, I guess, probably maybe one of the last open practices before the spring game.
Yeah, I think that's the plan. So give me a shout once you're out there.
All right, Tom. See you, man.
All right, have a good one.
All right. Thomas Goldkamp from Swamp 24/7 joining us here on Gators Breakdown. So kind of before we wrap up right here, a couple of quick updates here. Of course, Dan Mullen will be here in Jacksonville this Wednesday. So if you're in the Jacksonville area, of course, this Wednesday, check it out, 5 p.m. for the Gator Club of Jacksonville Gator Gathering. It's at the Lexington Hotel and Conference Center. So if you're in the Jacksonville area and can make it, I'd like to see you there. You can, if you see me, stop by, say hello. We'll talk for a little while. We'll talk Gators, of course, and whatever else comes up there. So I always enjoy seeing the listeners out there. So, tickets are still available for that event for $10. I think there are walk-ups available now. So if you want to get there, I imagine you have to get there pretty close to 5 o'clock to walk in. But the $10 is a donation to the scholarship fund there. So that's, of course, people will be taking, advantage of maybe getting a scholarship out of the money that you donate for the Jacksonville Gator Gathering with Dan Mullen this Wednesday. So sure, check it out. Let's fill that place and show the support for Dan Mullen. And also, it's been mentioned, of course, the open practice this Saturday. It starts at 9:45 a.m. in Gainesville if you missed that. So it'll be early morning if you're driving from out of town there. So it is open to the fans, of course, and I hope to see many of you out there that I won't get to see in Jacksonville Wednesday. Out there, we'll go see maybe see you at 9:45 early Saturday morning, as this will be one of the last chances we get to see the team before the spring game. And I'm looking forward to it. It'll be kind of capping off the second week of practice. So this team will be in a bit of a groove, and a lot of the young guys will start to feel comfortable. So it should be a fun time seeing the team come together in front of the fans once again. And I really want to see things I kind of be looking for, kind of the command. Thomas kind of spoke to it, but the command Felipe Franks continues to show, and just how far along this offensive line is coming along. And it'd be interesting to see how much has changed from week 1 to week 2, from all the things we've just kind of heard from Thomas's practice reports, and just how much change we see in week 2. Some of the things that we just discussed could look a lot different come Saturday. Now, I think it will be real key to make sure, it won't be too critical from what's shown at a practice in April. But, there'll be some good there. There'll be some bad, and it's just one day. But, we'll definitely be sharing the thoughts next week on the show and from what I see on Saturday. So, yeah, it should be a lot of they kind of set that up with the fans being out there. They'll set up some fun things as well. So you'll see some fun, I'm sure some deep passes from Frank or any of the quarterbacks to the receivers there, and you're trying to put on a show for the fans as well. But yeah, I don't know how much we can really take away from the offensive line versus the defensive line, but I think it's a lot key on who's playing where, who lines up with the ones, who lines up with the twos. Maybe, as I said, because you'll be kind of at the halfway point of spring. So I think the players or the coaches now kind of have a belief or have a feel for what these players are starting to do in spring, and kind of get ready for the spring game and the like there. So I think we'll kind of see some inclination of maybe where some guys are lining up, and kind of see where it goes from there, and see how much change from week 1 to week 2, and just kind of overall what we see for this couple hours on Saturday. Now, I want to give a special shout out to Gators Breakdown Facebook followers. Haven't done that in a long time. In the groups out there on Facebook, and just a few of them here: Gator Talk, Gator Action, Gator Chomping, Gators Group, For the Love of the Gators, Florida Mafia. If I left anyone out, I apologize. But thanks for listening and the interaction from all you, and glad to be a part of those Gators communities out there on Facebook. I live mostly on Twitter with all the Gator Talk and stuff, but of course, got the Facebook page as well, and a lot of followers, and share them. Share the podcast out there too. So I know a lot of listeners on those Gator groups out there. So thanks so much for the follows and listens there. And hey, look, coming up soon in the next few episodes, I would say next probably 3-4 episodes from here. Gators Breakdown will be somewhere around 1 million listens. So I'm sure kind of do some kind of celebration for that coming up. So 1 million total listens since the launch of Gators Breakdown, and big accomplishment. And I can't do it without you guys and all the everything that you bring to the table, and listening to Gators Breakdown and wanting the podcast out there. Look, we even do it during the off season, at least one episode a week during the off season, about 40 minutes or so, like this episode is. But we will, we'll with stuff going on, as I said, there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation. There will always an episode for you guys to listen to. That's what Florida football is. Always something to talk about, even if it's just one episode a week. We'll get it out there. But thanks for all the listeners interaction. But like I said, we'll hit 1 million listens soon, and we'll do something for that. So all right. So hopefully, guys, if you're in Jacksonville, hope to see you on Wednesday. 5 p.m. That's when the doors open. Dan Mullen will start speaking at 6 o'clock there at Lexington Hotel and Conference Center in the Prudential area of downtown Jacksonville. And hope to see you there. If not, hope to see some of you at the Saturday morning open practice at 9:45, bright and early there. So I'm David Waters, the host of Gators Breakdown. You can follow me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.